Hello, everyone, and we have a fresh story for you, full of emotions, twists, and inspiration. Don't forget to like and get comfortable. It will be interesting. My name is Jack Harper, and I've always believed that life is like a well-tended garden. You put in the work, you nurture it, and over time, it blossoms into something beautiful. I was born and raised in the small town of Willow Creek, Missouri, where the air is filled with the song of cicadas in the summer and a quiet blanket of snow falls over you in the winter. It's a place where people wave to each other from their front porches, where the diner on Main Street serves cherry pie like your grandma made it, and where everyone knows your name, or at least what you do. I called this place home for 38 years, and for 12 of those, I shared it with my wife, Kelly, and our two children, Sam and Lily. We were the American dream personified, or so I thought. But as I'd later learn, photographs can hide the cracks beneath their glossy surface. Our house sits on the corner of 3rd Street and Elm Avenue, a two-story colonial with white siding and black shutters, the kind you'd see on a postcard labeled Suburban Bliss. It has a wraparound porch where Kelly and I used to sit with glasses of sweet tea and watch Sam and Lily catch fireflies on summer evenings. The backyard is big enough for a swing set and a vegetable garden, though I'm the only one who tends it. Kelly says she's not good with plants, but she's got a knack for people, especially kids. She's been the school nurse at Willow Creek Elementary for almost a decade, and every kid in town knows her as the kind woman with the cartoon-themed Band-Aids. I'm a project manager for a construction company in Springfield, about an hour away. It's a stable job, it pays the bills, and it allows me to come home for dinner most nights. I'm not one to chase grand ambitions, never have been. All I've ever wanted was a good life for my family, and for a long time I thought we had it. Sam is 10 now, a skinny kid with my dark hair and Kelly's hazel eyes. He's obsessed with baseball, spending half his life in the backyard practicing swings or begging me to drive him to the practice range. Lily is 7, a whirlwind of laughter and questions, always leaving glitter in her wake from some art project. She has Kelly's curls and a stubborn streak that I'm sure she gets from my family. The two of us are the center of our world, the reason I get up at 6 in the morning and don't complain about the long days at work. Kelly and I built this life together, brick by brick, and I won't deny that I was proud of it. We weren't rich, not by a long shot, but we had enough. Enough for a mortgage, a used minivan, and the occasional family trip to the Ozarks. Enough to feel like we were doing something right. Willow Creek is the kind of place that makes you believe in the idea of a perfect family. It's not just the tree-lined streets or the annual 4th of July parade when the whole town comes out with folding chairs and sparklers. It's the way people look out for each other, the way Mrs. Callahan, our neighbor, always brought over a casserole when someone was sick, or the way Mr. Thompson at the hardware store let you pay next week if you didn't have enough cash. Kelly and I were part of that fabric. We went to church on Sundays, not because we were particularly religious, but because it felt right. We volunteered at the school fall festival, standing by the toss ring and laughing as Sam tried to throw a football over the tire. We were Harpers, and in Willow Creek, that meant something. But even in a place where everything seems perfect, you don't always notice the shadows creeping up. Looking back, the first signs were so subtle, I didn't even notice them. Kelly started staying late at work, maybe once or twice a week. She'd say she needed to finish some paperwork or help a kid with a scraped knee who was staying after school. I didn't think much of it. School nurses don't work a strict schedule, and Kelly has always been the type to do more than she has to. But there was something else, too. She started checking her phone more often, turning the screen away from me. At first, I assumed they were just work emails or texts from her sister, who lives in St. Louis and is always embroiled in some kind of drama. But there was more. She was laughing at something on the phone, briefly, as if to herself, and when I asked what was funny, she would say, "Oh, nothing, just stupid," and change the subject. Then there were times when she seemed distant. Not cold, but like her mind was somewhere else. We'd be sitting at dinner, Sam blabbering on about his latest game, Lily showing me a drawing she'd done, and I'd catch Kelly staring out the window, fork poised over her plate. I'd ask if everything was okay, and she'd smile the same warm smile that had made me fall in love with her all those years ago and say she was just tired. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was Kelly, my Kelly, the woman who'd been there for me through late-night diaper changes and when I lost my job during the recession. She'd laughed with me over burnt pancakes on our first anniversary and held my hand when my dad died. We were a strong couple, weren't we? I think it was September when I started to feel the changes more clearly. The kids were back in school, the air was cooler, and the leaves were starting to turn that fiery red that makes fall in Missouri so exciting. It was a Thursday, I remember, because Thursdays were pizza night. Kelly texted me around 4 that she was going to be late again, something about a meeting running late. I didn't mind. I picked the kids up from their clubs, stopped at Tony's for a large pepperoni pizza, and got home just in time to help Sam with his math homework while Lily was drawing at the kitchen table. By the time Kelly walked in, the pizza was half gone, and the kids were wreaking havoc over who got the last slice. "Hey, you finally made it," I said, looking up from my desk. She looked tired, her blonde hair pulled back into a messy bun, her scrubs slightly wrinkled from the day's work. But she was still beautiful, the kind of beauty that doesn't fade even after 12 years and 2 children. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Sorry I'm late," she said, dropping her bag by the door. The meeting ran long, and then I had to deal with a parent who kept asking about the lice protocols. "It's okay," I said, handing her the plate. "I left you some pizza. Sam already took the crusts, though." She laughed, but it was quick, like she was used to it. She sat and picked at her pizza and listened to the kids talk about their day, but I could tell she wasn't with us. Her eyes kept sliding to her phone, which she had set face down on the table. It vibrated a couple of times, and she glanced at it, but didn't pick it up. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But it was there, just a little bit, like a splinter you can't see but know is there. That night, after the kids went to bed, I tried to talk to her. We were in the living room, the TV blaring a sitcom neither of us were watching. She was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone, and I was looking at a work report I hadn't finished at the office. I put the papers down and looked at her. "Everything okay at work?" I asked, trying to speak lightly. "You've been staying late a lot lately." She didn't look up right away. "Yeah, I've just got a lot to do," she said, still running her finger across the screen. "You know how it is at the beginning of the school year. Kids are always getting sick or injured." "Of course," I nodded. "It's just, you're somehow different, like something's bothering you." That got her attention. She put the phone down and turned to me, her eyes soft but wary. "I'm fine, Jack. Really, just tired, that's all." I wanted to believe her. I believed her, mostly, but some part of me, small and quiet, wondered if I was missing something. I silenced the voice, told myself I was being paranoid. Kelly wasn't one to keep secrets. She'd always been an open book. Or so I thought. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of routine. I commuted to Springfield for work, managing schedules and budgets, returning home to coach Sam's baseball team or help Lily with her spelling words. Kelly kept coming home late, but she always had an explanation: a kid with a fever, a meeting with the principal, a parent who needed reassurance. I didn't push her. I trusted her. But doubts kept creeping in, quiet whispers in the back of my mind. The way she'd retreat to the bathroom with her phone, locking the door. The way she'd grow quiet when I asked about her day, giving evasive answers and diverting the conversation to me or the kids. The way she'd pull away slightly when I tried to hold her hand or kiss her goodnight. It wasn't just her behavior. There were other little things, noticeable but small. She'd started wearing makeup to work, something she rarely did before. Not much, just a little lipstick or mascara, but enough that I noticed. She'd bought a new perfume, something sharper and more floral than the soft vanilla she'd worn since we'd first met. One day, I found a new blouse in the laundry that I'd never seen before, a bright blue, silky one, not the kind she usually wore with her scrubs. When I asked about it, she laughed and said she'd found it at a garage sale and thought it would be appropriate for a parent-teacher conference. I didn't press her, but it stuck in my mind. By October, the cracks were harder to ignore. We were still the Harpers, still the family who smiled for the cameras at the school Halloween costume party, still hosted barbecues for the neighbors. But something was off, like a song played slightly out of tune. I began to watch more closely, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't help myself. I noticed the way Kelly left the room to take some calls, her voice low and clipped. I noticed that she'd put a password on her phone, something she'd never done before. I noticed the way she looked at me sometimes, not with anger or hurt, but with something that felt like guilt. I didn't want to believe it could be anything serious. I told myself it was stress, or maybe a midlife crisis. She'd turned 35 last summer, and I knew she was feeling unsettled. Maybe she was just trying to find herself, to shake things up. That's what I told myself. But deep down, I knew it wasn't true. I knew something was coming, something I wasn't prepared for. And with the leaves falling and the air growing cold, I couldn't shake the feeling that our perfect little life on the corner of 3rd Street and Elm Avenue was about to change forever. Happiness is a tricky thing. It can shine like fresh paint on an old house, hiding the cracks in the foundation. I'd always thought of my life with Kelly as something real, built on love and trust, and those little moments that connect people. Morning coffee made for each other, the laughter of children running around the yard, or quiet evenings when we just sat together without saying a word. But by October, I began to notice that those moments were becoming rarer, and in their place was something else, a shadow I couldn't quite see but could feel on my skin. It wasn't just a feeling, but like a cold breeze sneaking into the house through an open window. And the more I tried to convince myself that everything was okay, the louder my doubts became. Kelly was starting to change, and I couldn't help but notice. It started with little things that seemed innocent at first. She joined a gym, the one downtown with the bright neon signs and the evening yoga classes. She'd never been a fan of exercise, but suddenly she was going 3, sometimes 4 times a week. I was all for it. If she wanted to get in shape, I'd support her. "You're already beautiful, but if it makes you happy, go for it," I told her one dinner, winking. She smiled, but it was a distant smile, like she was thinking about something else. I chalked it up to fatigue. School was in full swing, and her job as a nurse at Willow Creek Elementary was rarely quiet. But the gym was just the beginning. Kelly began to pay more attention to her appearance. She had always been attractive, with her blonde locks and eyes that could make you feel like the only person in the room. But now she began to experiment. A new haircut, slightly shorter than usual, with soft waves that made her look like an actress from an old movie. Makeup was no longer just a light touch before work. Now she applied it with some kind of care, as if she were preparing for an important meeting. One day, I noticed a new set of cosmetics in the bathroom. Eyeshadow, blush, even eyeliner, something I had never noticed on her before. "I decided to try something new," she said when I asked, and then immediately changed the subject, asking how my day was. Then came the new lingerie. I stumbled upon it by accident while folding the laundry, lace, black, with thin straps, not at all like her usual cotton sets. I even teased her like, "Is this for a special occasion?" She laughed, but there was something forced in her laughter. "I just wanted to pamper myself," she answered, and I nodded, although something unpleasant stirred in my chest. I wanted to believe that this was all for herself, for her confidence, but somewhere deep inside I began to wonder, who was she trying so hard for? The most alarming sign was her late return home. At first it was once a week, then twice, and by mid-October, her on duty at school had become almost regular. She explained it in different ways. Either a meeting with teachers had dragged on, or a parent had come with a bunch of questions, or she needed to sort through medical records. I didn't argue her work could really be unpredictable, but when I offered to give her a ride home so she wouldn't have to get there on her own in the dark, she waved me off. "No need, Jack, I can handle it," she said, her voice a little sharper than usual. I backed off, but it stayed with me, like a pebble in my shoe that irritates me, but I'm too lazy to throw it out. The phone was another mystery. Kelly had always been open. Her phone sat on the kitchen counter, where anyone could pick it up to check the weather or answer a call. But now she had a password. I noticed it when I tried to pick up her phone to order takeout while she was in the shower. The screen lit up, demanding the code. I asked her about it later, trying not to sound accusatory. "Just to be safe," she said with a shrug. "The school requires that personal information be protected now." It sounded reasonable, but something about her tone too fast, too rehearsed made me wary. I tried to push the thoughts away. Kelly was my wife, the mother of our children, the woman with whom I shared everything from stupid jokes to nightmares. She wasn't the type to keep secrets. Or was she? I told myself it was just a midlife crisis, that maybe she just wanted to feel young, attractive, alive. I even tried to be more attentive, bringing her flowers for no reason, offering to have an evening just for the two of us. But every time I tried to get closer, it was like she'd put up an invisible wall. Not harshly, not overtly, but enough for me to feel it. One night, after the kids were in bed and Kelly was late again, I sat in the living room, staring at the TV, which was playing an old Western. I wasn't really watching it, my mind was elsewhere. I was remembering how it all began, how Kelly and I met at the Springfield State Fair, how she spilled lemonade on my shirt and laughed until she blushed, how we danced to the live band at our wedding, how we held newborn Sam as if he were the most fragile treasure in the world. These memories were so vivid, so real, that I couldn't believe that anything was wrong between us. But reality was different. It was slipping away from me, and I didn't know how to hold on to it. And then I did something I never would have thought of before. I installed a GPS tracker on her car. It was an impulsive act, born of a mixture of anxiety and desperation. I'd seen an ad for the device online, small, unnoticeable, with an app that showed her location in real time. I ordered it, telling myself it was just for peace of mind, that I'd probably never use it. But when the box arrived, I couldn't stop myself. Late that night, while Kelly was sleeping, I snuck into the garage and attached the tracker underneath her car, hiding it behind the rear bumper. My hands were shaking, and I felt like a traitor, but I couldn't stop that voice inside me from whispering, "You need to know." For the first few days, I didn't even open the app. I tried to go about my daily life, driving Sam to baseball games, helping Lily with her endless craft projects, making dinner when Kelly was running late. But every time she said she'd be late, I felt my heart clench. One night, when she texted again that she was running late because of a meeting, I couldn't take it anymore. I opened the app. A little red dot blinked on the map, showing that her car wasn't at her school, but a few miles away in an area with a small strip mall and a couple of coffee shops. I stared at the dot until the screen began to blur. Was she just getting coffee? Was she meeting a friend? I tried to think of 1,000 explanations, but none of them seemed to mask what I was feeling. I didn't tell her. I couldn't. I was afraid that if I started asking questions, everything would fall apart. Instead, I became more attentive. I noticed how she quickly put her phone away when I walked into the room. How she started wearing new jewelry, a thin silver ring on her pinky that I'd never seen before. How her laughter became less frequent, her gaze more evasive. I tried to talk to her, but every time I brought up her work or her mood, she brushed me off, saying that everything was fine, that she was just tired. But I knew it wasn't true. I'd seen her look at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. I'd heard her quietly talking on the phone in the bathroom when she thought I was asleep, and I could feel the gap growing between us that I didn't know how to bridge. I still loved her, God, how I loved her. But love, it turned out, wasn't always a shield from the truth. And the truth, whatever it was already breathing down my neck, ready to destroy everything we'd built. As a man, I wanted to trust my wife. I wanted to believe that the 12 years we'd spent together had built something unbreakable, a foundation of love, honesty, and the little promises we made to each other in the most ordinary moments. Over morning coffee, on walks in the park, on nights when we lay in bed and talked about our children's future. But as a father, I felt a different responsibility, heavier, more demanding, to protect Sam and Lily from anything that could destroy their world. And in that moment, as I stared at the red dot on my phone screen, blinking in the GPS tracker app, I knew that these two parts of me, husband and father, could no longer peacefully coexist. One of them had to give way. I'd installed a tracker on Kelly's car a week ago in an impulse that still made me feel like a jerk. It wasn't something I was proud of, but it was what I did. I told myself it was for peace of mind, that I just wanted to make sure everything was okay. But the truth was, I wasn't sure anymore. Her late arrivals, her evasive answers, her new perfume and blouses I'd never seen before, it all added up to a puzzle I didn't want to solve, but couldn't stop trying to figure out. And then, on one of those school nights, when she texted again that she'd be late because of work, I opened the app. The red dot hadn't moved. It wasn't at the school. It was a few miles away in the Riverside neighborhood, a quiet suburb of neat houses and manicured lawns. I knew the address. It was Trevor's house. Trevor Brown, a family friend, the coach of Lily's little soccer team. Tall, with a big smile and an easy charisma that made him the life of the party. He was the kind of guy who always knew what to say to make a crowd laugh and always brought beer to barbecues. Kelly and I had met him a couple of years ago when Lily had signed up for the team. He'd been married to a woman named Sarah, but they divorced the previous summer, and he'd been living alone in his house on Oak Street ever since. I'd never thought of him as anyone who could be a problem. He was just Trevor, the guy who taught our kids how to kick a ball and joked about my inability to keep it on the field. But now, looking at that red dot, my blood ran cold. I hadn't planned on going there. I told myself I'd just check, that it was a mistake, that maybe she'd stopped by for some innocent reason to discuss Lily's practice or drop off something for the team. But my hands found their way into the ignition, and 20 minutes later, I was driving through the quiet streets of Riverside. My truck, an old Ford I'd bought before Sam was born, was too loud in the quiet, so I parked 2 blocks from Trevor's house under an old oak tree, where my car would be out of sight. I turned off the engine and sat there, looking at the house. It was a neat, single-story house with exposed brick and a large window facing the street. The light was warm, and I could see shadows moving inside. Kelly's car, her silver Honda Agua, was parked in the driveway, next to Trevor's truck. As I stared at the scene, 100 explanations swirled in my head. Maybe she was just picking up Lily's jersey. Maybe they were having a teen parent-teacher meeting. But the longer I sat there, the louder the other voice became, the one that was whispering that I was kidding myself. I waited. Hours passed, and I didn't move. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't check my phone, didn't do anything but stare at the house. It was like waiting for a blow you know you can't stop. I imagined myself breaking in, pounding on the door, demanding an explanation. But something held me back. Maybe it was fear that I would see something I couldn't forget. Maybe it was hope that I was wrong. Maybe it was just cowardice. 2 hours later, the door opened. Kelly came out onto the porch, and even in the dim light of the street lamp, I could see that she looked different. Her hair was slightly mussed, as if she'd run her hands through it too many times. Her face was alight, not the tired smile I'd seen at home, but something else, something alive, almost radiant, as if she just had a moment that made her happy. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder, turned toward the door, and I watched as Trevor followed. He said something, and she laughed, a light, ringing laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. They didn't hug or kiss, but there was something intimate about the way they stood, the way she looked at him before she left, something that cut me like a knife. She got in the car and drove away. Trevor came back into the house, the lights went out, and I was alone in the dark. I didn't follow her. I didn't storm in, or make a scene, or do any of the things I was thinking about. Instead, I went home. It took almost an hour to get home, driving slowly, as if putting off the moment when I would have to come back to reality. When I got home, the lights in the living room were off, and I could hear the TV playing softly in the bedroom. Kelly was there, already in her pajamas, scrolling through her phone. She looked at me and smiled. "You're late," she said. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, I just got held up in the garage," I lied, trying to keep my voice even. "Checking the car." She nodded and went back to her phone. I went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, replaying that scene outside Trevor's house in my head. Her laugh, her beaming face, Trevor's shadow in the doorway. I tried to find an explanation that wouldn't break my heart, but none of them worked. I stayed up until dawn that night, and when the first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, I felt as broken as our lives. But I didn't tell her. Not that day, not that night, not in the days that followed. I went on as if nothing had changed, taking Sam to baseball games, helping Lily with her crafts, smiling at the neighbors on the street. But inside, I was a taut string, ready to snap. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. And every time I looked at Kelly, I saw not my wife, but the woman who walked out of Trevor's house, and it killed me. By the morning after that sleepless night of staring at the ceiling, I felt like someone had ripped everything that made me alive out of me. My eyes were burning with exhaustion, my heart was pounding with a mixture of anger and pain, and the same image kept playing in my head. Kelly leaving Trevor's house, that glowing, almost alien look on her face. I knew I had to do something, but every fiber of my being resisted. I didn't want to be the guy who spied on his wife, who went through her things, who made a scene. But I also didn't want to be the guy who turned a blind eye to the truth, letting it eat away at everything we'd built. I was a husband, a father, a man who believed in family, and I couldn't just sit by and let my life fall apart. The next day, I made a decision. I couldn't live in this limbo any longer, floating between hope and suspicion. I wanted the truth, whatever it was, even if it tore me apart. But I also knew I couldn't let this destroy Sam and Lily. They were my anchor, my reason for holding on, and I wasn't going to let them fall victim to what was happening between me and Callie. So the first thing I did was call my sister Amy, who lived an hour away from Willow Creek, in a small town called Fairview. Amy had always been the one to listen without judgment, and I knew she wouldn't ask too many questions. I told her I needed time with Callie to sort out a few things, and asked if she could take the kids for the weekend. She agreed without hesitation, and I felt a small sense of relief, knowing that Sam and Lily would be safe while I tried to figure out how to save or bury our family. I dropped the kids off at Amy's after school. Sam was excited about the prospect of spending the weekend with his cousins, and Lily was clutching her stuffed bunny, as usual, and talking about how she and her aunt were going to bake cookies. I hugged them tighter than usual and promised to pick them up on Sunday. When I got home, the house was unusually quiet. Without the sound of children laughing, without the clatter of feet on the stairs, without the sound of Lily watching her cartoons on the television, the silence seemed almost tangible, like a thick fog filling every room. I sat down on a kitchen chair and stared at the empty table, trying to collect my thoughts. I knew I had to talk to Kelly, but I didn't want it to feel like an interrogation. I wanted her to tell me everything, to look me in the eye, and either confirm my fears or allay them. So I decided to make dinner. I wasn't a master cook, but I could cook well enough to impress. I went to the supermarket and bought everything I needed: 2 ribeye steaks, some potatoes for baking, asparagus, a bottle of red wine, the same Cabernet Sauvignon Kelly had loved since our first dates. I even stopped at a florist and bought a bouquet of white roses, her favorite. At home, I set the table like it was a special occasion. A white tablecloth we only used for Thanksgiving, candles I found in a drawer of Christmas decorations, and an old record player on which I played a Frank Sinatra record, the music we danced to at our wedding. I wanted everything to be perfect, not because I was hoping for romance, but because I wanted to see if she could lie to me in this setting, looking me straight in the eye. Kelly got home around 6 o'clock. I heard her car pull up to the house and felt my heart sink. She walked into the kitchen, still in her scrubs, her bag slung over her shoulder, and stopped when she saw the table. Her eyebrows rose, and a mixture of surprise and wariness crossed her face. "Jack, what is this?" she asked, putting her bag on the floor. "Some kind of holiday." "I just wanted to do something special," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Amy's got the kids, so it's a 2-person night. It's been a while since we've had anything like that." She smiled, but it was a forced smile, as if she were trying to figure out what I was up to. "That's nice," she said, taking off her jacket. Give me 5 minutes, I'll change. While she was upstairs, I finished cooking, searing the steaks to medium, just the way she liked them, roasting the potatoes with rosemary, and steaming the asparagus. I poured the wine and lit the candles. When Kelly came down, she was wearing the same blue silk blouse I'd seen in the wash a few weeks ago, and her hair was loose, brushing her shoulders. She looked beautiful, but I couldn't help but notice that her beauty now seemed alien to me, like a painting you love but no longer belongs to you. We sat down at the table, and the first few minutes passed in easy, almost casual chatter. She told me about a funny incident at school, where a first grader tried to hide a bug in his backpack, and I shared a story about a colleague in Springfield who spilled coffee on his engineering drawings. But it was all superficial, like thin ice about to crack. I waited for the right moment, and it came when she put down her knife and picked up her glass of wine. "How was your shift?" I asked, slicing into my steak. My voice was calm, but inside I felt everything tightening, like I was teetering on the edge of a precipice. She didn't even blink. "Tired shift," she replied, looking at her plate. "One boy fell during recess and knocked out a tooth. We had to calm him down and call his parents." I nodded as if in agreement, but my fingers tightened on the knife. I took a sip of wine to buy myself time and looked her straight in the eyes. "I hope you helped him, like you helped Trevor last night." The fork fell from her hand and landed on her plate with a soft clink. Her face went white, her eyes widened, and I saw something in them I'd never seen in Kelly before: terror. Not just surprise or confusion, but real, visceral fear, as if I'd just pulled a card out of my sleeve that would blow up her carefully constructed world. She opened her mouth, but no words came, and in that moment I knew my worst fears were true. "Jack, please," she finally breathed out, her voice trembling like an aspen leaf in the wind. "Please, what?" I asked, my voice even despite everything that was boiling inside. "So that I can pretend that nothing happened, so that I can remain the same convenient husband who can be deceived." She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "It was only once," she began, but I interrupted her. "You've been to his house at least 4 times in the last 2 weeks," I said, each word like a hammer blow. "I wouldn't have noticed once. 4 is a pattern." Her face twisted, tears streaming down her cheeks, but I didn't feel pity. Not at that moment. All I felt was the pain that burned inside me, the anger I'd held back for so long. I stood up, walked over to the kitchen cabinet where I'd hidden the envelope, and returned to the table. I placed it in front of her, a plain white envelope containing the divorce papers I'd prepared with my lawyer that morning. I hadn't planned on getting to this point so soon, but after the night before, after seeing her outside Trevor's house, I knew I couldn't live under the same roof with her, pretending everything was okay. "The house will be yours," I said, looking down at her. "The car too, but the children will live with me, and I will do everything to ensure that the court confirms this. Not because you are a bad mother, but because you destroyed the family deliberately, coldly, methodically." She began to sob, covering her face with her hands, but I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her alone at the table, surrounded by the candles that were still burning and the Sinatra music that now sounded like a mockery. I went up to the bedroom, closed the door, and lay down on the bed, but I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, just like I had that night after Trevor's house, and thought about how everything I knew about my life had turned out to be a lie. I thought about Sam and Lily, and how I was going to explain to them that their mother wouldn't be living with us anymore. I thought about how I was going to go on living my life, knowing that the woman I loved most in the world had betrayed me. The next morning, I packed my things, a couple suitcases of clothes, and my laptop, and drove to Amy's. Kelly tried to talk to me, begged me to give her a chance to explain, but I wasn't ready to listen. I knew that if I started, I'd either break down or say something I'd regret. I simply told her that we'd talk later when I was ready and left. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing: I couldn't be a part of her lies anymore. And for the sake of my children, I had to find a way to move forward, even if every step tore me apart. After that night at dinner, When I put the divorce papers in front of Kelly, our house on the corner of 3rd Street and Elm Avenue stopped feeling like a home. It felt like the set for a play no one wanted to see anymore. The silence that had once felt cozy now felt heavy, like sleet bending the tree branches to the ground. I moved in with my sister, Amy, in Fairview, taking with me a couple suitcases and the feeling that my life had crumbled like a house of cards. But even in the chaos, I knew I had to hold on for Sam and Lily. They were my beacon, the only thing keeping me from drowning in the pain and anger that raged inside me. Kelly didn't give up right away. The next day after dinner, she started calling. At first, they were texts, short, cautious, as if she was afraid to scare me off. "Jack, we need to talk. Please give me a chance to explain." I didn't answer, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know what to say. Every word she said, every call she made, was like salt in an open wound. I saw her face that night outside Trevor's house, her laugh, her glow, and it was like a knife she'd plunged into my chest. But she didn't stop. By the end of the week, she was at Amy's, standing on her doorstep, her eyes red from crying, her hands shaking. I didn't want to see her, but Amy talked me into coming out, saying I couldn't hide forever. We sat on Amy's front porch, under an old elm tree that cast long shadows across the lawn. Kelly looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her usual confidence had disappeared. She looked at me, and there was so much pain in her eyes that for a second I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Jack, I know what I did," she began, her voice shaking as if each word was difficult. "I made a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. But I love you. I love Sam and Lily. I don't want to lose our family." I was silent, looking down at my hands clasped in my lap. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to scream, to ask how she could do this to us, how she could choose Trevor, that smug coach with his stupid jokes, over our family. But the other part of me, the part that still remembered us dancing in the rain on our first anniversary, wanted to believe she was telling the truth. "It's not a mistake, Kelly," I finally said, my voice colder than I'd expected. "A mistake is forgetting to buy milk or being late for an appointment. This is a choice. You made that choice over and over again. 4 times in 2 weeks, to be exact. And who knows how many more before I started noticing." She flinched as if I'd hit her. "It wasn't like that, Jack. It was, I don't know how to explain it. I was confused. I felt lost, and Trevor, he was just there. But that doesn't mean I don't love you." "Are you serious?" I looked up, the anger I'd been holding in for so long starting to bubble up. "You think you can just say, 'I'm confused,' and that'll fix everything? You think I can just forget about you walking out of his house, laughing like you were the happiest woman in the world? You think I can't see how you've changed, the new perfume, the new clothes, the new you that doesn't seem to want to be with us anymore?" She started crying, covering her face with her hands, but I didn't stop. "I saw you, Kelly. I sat in the car like some kind of Gotham spy, watching you leave his house. And you know what the worst part was? It wasn't that you were there. It was the way you looked. You were happy, happier than I'd seen you in months, and that killed me." She looked up, her eyes full of tears. "Jack, I swear I'll end this. I already told Trevor it's over. I'll sign up for therapy. We can go together. I'll do anything to get us back. Please, give me a chance." I looked at her, and for a moment I wanted to believe her. I wanted to go back to when we were just Jack and Kelly, laughing at stupid jokes and dreaming about our kids growing up. But then I remembered Sam asking me last week why Mom was late so often, and Lily drawing a picture of our family with Kelly standing a little apart. I remembered lying awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling my love for her war with the pain of her betrayal, and I realized I couldn't do that. Not now. Maybe never. "Kelly," I said, my voice firmer than I expected, "cheating isn't a mistake. It's a choice. You've made that choice over and over again. And every time you did, you didn't choose us. Not me. Not our children. You chose him." She tried to say something, but I raised my hand, stopping her. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, and I don't know how to live with this, but I know I can't pretend it didn't happen. For Sam and Lily, I have to be honest, even if it tears me apart." She was sobbing, but I couldn't comfort her. I stood up and walked back into the house, leaving her on the porch. Amy, who had heard our conversation through the open window, hugged me silently as I walked in. She didn't say a word, but her hug was what kept me from falling apart. The next day, I knew I had to talk to the kids. It was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. I picked up Sam and Lily from school and drove them to the park where we often went on weekends. We sat on a bench by the pond, and I watched the ducks glide across the water, trying to find words that wouldn't hurt them. But there were no words. "Guys," I began, looking at their faces, Sam, with his serious eyes, and Lily, who was fiddling with the hem of her jacket. "I want to talk to you about Mom and me. Sometimes, sometimes adults do things that make life difficult. And right now, Mom and we can't live together." Sam frowned. "Are you getting a divorce?" he asked, and his voice was so mature it made my heart ache. "Yes," I answered, trying to speak calmly. "Mom and I love you more than anything in the world, and that will never change. But sometimes adults can't be together, no matter how hard they try." Lily looked at me, her eyes full of tears. "Mom won't live with us anymore." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "She will always be your mother, Lily, and you will see her, I promise. But for now, you and I will live separately so that everything will be a little easier." Sam was silent, looking down at his sneakers, and Lily was pressed against me, her small shoulders shaking. I wrapped my arms around them both, and we sat there for a long time until the sun began to set, turning the sky orange and pink. I knew this was just the beginning, that there would be hard days ahead, questions, tears. But I also knew that I would do anything to protect them, to give them a sense of security, even as my own world crumbled. There was a war raging inside me. I still loved Kelly, not the blind, young love we'd had in the beginning, but the deep, complicated love that comes after years of being together, after sleepless nights with sick children, after all the triumphs and defeats you experience together. But that love was poisoned now. Every time I thought about her, I saw her outside Trevor's house, her lies, her choices. And I didn't know how to reconcile the two feelings, the love and the betrayal. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to live with the weight of it. Kelly kept texting and calling. She offered therapy, promised to cut Trevor out of her life forever, swore she'd do anything to bring our family back. But I couldn't believe her. Not because she wasn't sincere, maybe she was, but because every time I looked at her, I didn't see my wife. I saw a woman who'd chosen someone else. And that wasn't something that could be fixed with a few sessions with a therapist or promises that sounded like she was trying to convince herself. I returned to our house a week later to get more things. Kelly was there, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee that had apparently gone cold. She looked at me, and there was such a pleading look in her eyes that I almost stopped. But I walked past her, gathered my things, and left without saying a word. I knew I should have felt something: pity, anger, love, but all I felt was emptiness. It was as if the storm that had raged inside me had died down, leaving only silence and destruction in its wake. I started a new life with the kids in Fairview. We rented a small house not far from Amy, and I tried to make it ours. I hung Lily's drawings on the walls, and I put Sam's baseball trophies on the shelf, and every night we cooked dinner together, even if it was just macaroni and cheese. But every night, when I put them to bed, I saw questions in their eyes, questions I didn't have answers to. And every night, when I lay in my bed, I thought about Kelly and what we'd lost and whether I would ever find peace. Life went on, as it always did, but it would never be the same, and I knew there were more storms ahead, more pain, more choices. But I also knew that for Sam and Lily, I would find a way to get through this, even if it meant leaving behind the woman I once loved more than anything. Time passed slowly after that dinner with the truth, as if someone were stretching out each minute, forcing me to relieve the pain and uncertainty over and over again. I moved in with my sister in Fairview, into a small rented house with peeling paint and a creaky porch that, despite its modest size, became a refuge for me and the kids. Sam and Lily adjusted to their new lives as best they could, Sam immersing themselves in baseball, and Lily drawing endless pictures that I hung on the walls to make our new home feel like our old one. But every night, as I put them to bed, I saw in their eyes the shadow of questions I couldn't answer. I tried to be there for them, but there was still a storm raging inside me, and I knew that storm would not subside until the trial was over. The trial began a month after I filed for divorce. I didn't want it to come to this, to lawyers and courtrooms and the cold legalese that turned our lives into paperwork and arguments. But I had no choice. I couldn't leave Sam and Lily in a house where their mother tore down everything we'd built as if it meant nothing. I hired a lawyer, Marilyn Crow, a sharp-witted, tough-minded woman who told me right away that it wouldn't be easy, but that we had a fighting chance. She warned me that divorce in a small town like Willow Creek was as much a social battle as it was a legal one. Everyone knew everyone, and rumors spread like wildfire. Kelly had hired a lawyer too, a young guy from Springfield named David Lewis, who seemed good at portraying his clients as innocent victims of circumstance. I watched him try to mount Kelly's defense, arguing that she was under pressure, that her actions were one-off lapses brought on by stress and fatigue from her job. But Marilyn was prepared. She had gathered all the evidence I had, GPS tracking data showing that Kelly had repeatedly visited Trevor's house after hours, text message transcripts I'd obtained from our phone company, which I wasn't proud of, but it was necessary, and even testimony from Trevor's neighbor, Mrs. Edwards, who had spotted Kelly's car in his driveway several times in recent months. The trial took place in the Springfield County Courthouse, a high-ceilinged building with wooden benches that creaked whenever anyone moved. I sat in the front row, trying not to look at Kelly, who sat across from me, dressed in a sharp gray suit, her hair pulled back into a neat bun. She looked less like my wife and more like a stranger playing the role of a remorseful woman. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a loving mother who had made a mistake, but still deserved to be a part of her children's lives. But Marilyn was relentless. She methodically laid out the facts. Kelly had been having an affair with Trevor Brown, a married man who coached a youth soccer team that included our daughter, Lily. She had lied to me about her shifts, using her job as a school nurse as cover. She had knowingly and repeatedly violated our family's trust. The judge, an older woman named Elizabeth Hartman, listened with an unreadable expression. She asked questions that cut like a razor, and I could see Kelly wince every time Marilyn presented a new piece of evidence. When Marilyn produced GPS tracking data proving that Kelly had been to Trevor's house at least 4 times in 2 weeks, the courtroom went silent. Even Kelly's attorney hesitated, trying to come up with a counterargument, but all he could come up with was that Mrs. Harper's personal life should not interfere with her rights as a mother. Judge Hartman raised an eyebrow and made a note in her papers, and I felt something inside me clench, not from joy, but from the knowledge that this was the end. 2 months into the trial, the judge made her decision. I was awarded primary custody of Sam and Lily. Kelly was granted weekend visitation and shared vacations, but the kids would live with me in Fairview. The house on 3rd Street and Elm Avenue was Kelly's, as I'd promised, along with her car and half our savings. I didn't want to destroy it, I just wanted to protect our children. The judge also noted that Kelly's behavior, especially her involvement with Trevor, a man who worked with children, including our daughter, had damaged her reputation as a responsible parent. It wasn't just a legal defeat for Kelly, it was a blow to her image in the eyes of Willow Creek. The town was buzzing with activity as the news spread. Willow Creek was a place where gossip was currency, and the story of Kelly and Trevor became the talk of the main street diner, the grocery store line, and church gatherings. People who had once smiled at us at school events now whispered behind our backs. Mrs. Callahan, our neighbor who always brought casseroles, stopped saying hello to Kelly when she picked up the kids for the weekend. Mr. Thompson from the hardware store, who knew everyone in town, looked at her with pity mingled with judgment. Kelly's reputation, which she had so carefully built as a school nurse and a caring mother, began to crumble like a sandcastle beneath the waves. But Kelly wasn't the only one who paid a price. Trevor Brown, the man who had seemed so charming and harmless, found himself in the middle of his own storm. The school where he volunteered, coaching the youth soccer team, fired him when word of his affair with Kelly reached the administration. In a small town, an affair with a married woman and the mother of one of the kids he coached wasn't just a moral transgression, it was a breach of trust that the school couldn't ignore. The parents of the other kids on the team began to ask questions, and soon Trevor was asked to leave. His reputation, like Kelly's, was in tatters, and I heard he was looking for a job in another town, away from the judgmental eyes of Willow Creek. But the biggest blow to Trevor was his own divorce. His wife, Sarah, who had already been through a tough time with their separation the previous summer, filed for divorce as soon as she found out about his affair with Kelly. I met Sarah one day at the supermarket, and she looked like her world had fallen apart too. She didn't blame me, she even said she was sorry things had turned out this way for our family. But I could see the same pain in her eyes that I felt, and it was another reminder of how far the consequences of Kelly and Trevor's actions had gone. For me, winning the lawsuit didn't bring relief. I won custody of the kids, but it didn't fill the void left by the destruction of our family. Sam became quieter, often retreating to his room and listening to music for hours instead of chatting about baseball like he used to. Lily began asking questions I didn't know how to answer. Why did Mom do this? Does she not love us anymore? I tried to explain that Mom loved them, but that adults sometimes make mistakes that change everything. But even to me, those words felt hollow, like I was trying to tape over a crack in the wall. Kelly kept trying to reach me. She called, she texted, she left voicemails, begging me to give her a chance to make things right. She told me she was in therapy. She told me she had cut off all contact with Trevor. She was willing to do anything to bring our family back together. But I couldn't listen to her. Not because I didn't believe she was being sincere, maybe she did want to make things right. But because every time I heard her voice, I saw her outside Trevor's house. I saw her lies, her choices, and it was like poison, eating away at whatever was left of my love for her. Life in Fairview began to improve, but slowly. I took a new job at a construction company closer to home so I could spend more time with the kids. Sam, Lily, and I established new routines. Friday nights with pizza and movies, Sunday walks to the park where Lily collected leaves for her crafts. I tried to be not only a father to them, but also a mother figure when Kelly wasn't around. But every time they went away for the weekend, I felt my heart tighten with fear that they would return with new questions, new wounds. Willow Creek would go on with its life, but it would never be the same for us. The house on 3rd Street and Elm Avenue was just a building, a place where our family had once been. Kelly was still there, but I knew she felt the same emptiness I did. She had lost not only me, but the respect of a town that had once considered her the perfect wife and mother. And while I meant her no harm, I couldn't help but feel that this was a kind of payback not mine, but one she had brought upon herself. I looked at my children, at the smiles that still appeared despite everything we had been through, and I knew that for them, I had to keep going. The court had given me custody, but the real battle was still ahead, the battle to give Sam and Lily a life of love and stability, even if my own soul was scarred. And I knew I would do anything to win that battle, because they were my world, and no amount of pain, no amount of betrayal could change that. Living in Fairview was like trying to put together a puzzle with half its pieces missing. I'd moved here with Sam and Lily to start over, but every day I was reminded that the past wasn't so easy to leave behind. The house on 3rd Street and Elm Avenue, where Kelly and I had built our family, was now just a memory, a shadow that haunted me in my quietest moments. I was learning to be a single father, learning to be everything to my children: father, mother, cook, psychologist, chauffeur. It wasn't what I dreamed of when Kelly and I stood at the altar and promised each other forever. But life, I've learned, rarely follows our plans. It throws you into a storm, and you either learn to swim or drown. Our new house in Fairview was more modest than the one we'd left in Willow Creek, a one-story cottage with peeling green paint and a small backyard barely big enough for Lily's swing set. The inside smelled of old wood and fresh paint, which I'd used to cover up the signs of its previous occupants. I'd hung Lily's drawings on the walls, bright, chaotic sketches of flowers and unicorns and our smiling faces, though her latest work had been a little less cheerful, with dark clouds in the background. Sam's baseball trophies lined the living room shelf, and his bat sat in the corner, always ready for another practice. I tried to make this place home, but sometimes, in the quiet of the late evening, I could feel Kelly's absence filling every room, like an emptiness that couldn't be ignored. Being a single dad was harder than I could have imagined. Mornings were a chaos of trying to make breakfast, get the kids ready for school, find clean socks for Sam, and convince Lily that her favorite pink unicorn t-shirt couldn't be worn for the third day in a row. I learned how to braid my hair awkward and crooked, but Lily giggled and said it was almost like mom's. I mastered the art of making mac and cheese without burning, and I even started making Amy's cookies, though my first attempts ended up looking more like charcoal than dessert. Sam helped as much as he could. He was older and already knew our lives had changed. But I could see how much he missed the old days, those nights when we'd all sit around eating dinner and Kelly would tell stories from high school. At night, after the kids were asleep, I was alone with my thoughts, and that was the hardest time. I would lie in bed, stare at the ceiling, and think of Kelly. Her laugh, loud and warm, that once filled our home. Her eyes could say more than words when she looked at me across the table or ironed my shirts in the morning so I would look presentable for work. I would think of her singing lullabies to Lily, of dancing with Sam in the kitchen while the radio played, of lying in bed and whispering about who our children would become. These memories were like old photographs you find in a box. They bring joy, but they cut you right back to your core because you know that moment will never come back. But then I remembered other things too. Her lies. The distant look in her eyes as she checked her phone. Her beaming face as she walked out of Trevor's house. I remembered how she had destroyed everything we'd spent 12 years building, and those memories were like a cold shower that washed away the nostalgia and left only the pain. I didn't want to hate her. I knew that hatred would only make things worse. But I couldn't forgive her, couldn't forget how she'd chosen someone else, how she'd put our family, our children, at risk. And in those moments, I knew I had to move forward, not for myself, but for Sam and Lily. Life started to improve, slowly but surely. I got a new job at a construction company in Fairview, which meant less commuting and more time with the kids. We established new traditions, Friday nights with pizza and movies, where Lily always picked something with princesses and Sam grumbled but secretly watched. On Saturdays, we went to the park, where I taught Lily how to ride a bike without side wheels and Sam practiced his kicking. I tried to fill their days with joy, but there were times when I could tell they missed Kelly. Lily would sometimes ask when her mother was coming home, and Sam would become quieter when I mentioned her. I knew they loved her, and I never spoke ill of her, even though I was seething inside. I wanted them to have good memories of their mother, even if I couldn't do that myself. One of the biggest changes in our new life was football. Lily was still playing for the boys' team, but after Trevor was fired, the team was left without a coach. My parents tried to find a replacement, but no one wanted to take on the responsibility on top of their work schedules. I looked at Lily, the light in her eyes as she put on her football kit, and I knew I couldn't let her lose that. So I became a coach. I, who had never been a star athlete, who at school had loved books more than running around the field, now stood on the sideline every Sunday, a whistle around my neck, barking instructions to 7-year-old girls who were racing around the field like a hurricane. The first practice was a disaster. I mixed up the terms, forgot where the goalie was supposed to be, and almost got hit in the face by a ball when I tried to show her how to shoot. But Lily was laughing, and the other kids were cheering me on, and I realized this wasn't just a game, it was a way to connect with my daughter, to give her something stable in a world that had changed so much. Sam came to practice too, sometimes helping set up cones or hand out water, and I saw him start to smile more often, as if the pitch had become a place where we could be a family, even without Kelly. Sunday games became my favorite time of the week. I'd stand on the field, watching Lily run after the ball, her pigtails bouncing, Sam yelling encouragement from the stands. The other kids' parents began to treat me with respect, even a warmth I hadn't expected. They knew what I'd been through. Word had spread to Fairview at Willow Creek, but no one asked questions. Instead, they brought me thermoses of coffee, shared homemade muffins, and patted me on the shoulder after successful games. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't alone, like I wasn't just a dad trying to keep things together, but part of something bigger. Kelly came to pick up the kids every weekend, as agreed in court. She'd pick them up on Saturday mornings, and I'd see Lily rushing over to hug her, while Sam stood a little apart, but still smiling. I tried to be polite, but every time I saw her, something inside me twisted. She looked tired, her eyes were duller than before, and I knew she was paying a price, too. The rumors in Willow Creek had taken their toll. She was still the school nurse, but parents were now looking at her with suspicion, some even asking for someone else to see their kids. She'd lost not just her family, but part of her reputation, and I knew it was hurting her. But I couldn't afford to feel sorry for her. Not after everything. Some nights, I still lay awake, replaying my life with Kelly in my head. I remembered how we'd dreamed of the future, how we'd planned trips to Disneyland, how we'd laugh at her inability to make an omelet. But then I'd remember her lies, her choices, and it was like a punch to the gut. I knew I should let go of the past, but it clung to me like an old sweater you can't throw away because it still smells like home. I was learning to live with the pain, learning to accept it as a part of me without letting it define me. Life in Fairview had become our new reality. The kids and I had found our rhythm, our little joys. I watched Lily score her first home run and screamed until my voice went hoarse. I watched Sam begin to open up, telling me about his dreams of becoming a professional baseball player. I felt us growing closer, as if the storm we'd been through had made us stronger. And every Sunday, standing in the ballpark, I knew we were no longer playing on someone else's field. We were building our own, and no one, not Kelly, not Trevor, not the past, could take that away from us. I didn't know what lay ahead. There were days when the pain returned, like an old scar that aches before the rain. But there were also days when I looked at my children and knew we could do this. We were a family, not the one I'd planned, but the one we'd made anew. And that was enough. Kelly's confession. My life was like a faded tapestry, beautiful from afar, but up close you could see the threads fraying, the patterns beginning to unravel. My name is Kelly Harper, and I was a wife, a mother, a school nurse, a woman who seemed to have it all under control. But if I were honest, I was only putting on a facade. Inside, I was a glass vase, ready to shatter at the slightest prod. I made no excuses for what I had done. I have no intention of apologizing to those who would judge me. This is not an attempt to clear my conscience, but an attempt to understand myself, to understand how I got to the point where I lost everything I loved. We lived in Willow Creek, Missouri, in a house on the corner of 3rd Street and Elm Avenue. It was the kind of house you imagine when you picture the perfect family. White walls, black shutters, a porch where Jack and I would sip sweet tea while the kids caught fireflies. Sam and Lily were the center of my world. Sam was 10, and he was everything Jack was: dark hair, a stubborn jaw, a love of baseball that drove him to spend hours practicing in the yard. Lily, my little 7, was a ray of sunshine, with my blonde curls and an insatiable passion for drawing that left glitter on everything she touched. I loved them so much that sometimes it scared me, an anchor that kept me grounded even when I felt like I was sinking. My days were filled with the routine that I thought was life. Mornings began at 6. I'd get up, make breakfast porridge for Sam, toast and jam for Lily, coffee for Jack. Then I'd get the kids ready for school, make sure they had backpacks, lunches, and clean socks. I worked as a nurse at Willow Creek Elementary, a job I loved despite the endless colds, scrapes, and parents who'd call me in a panic over the slightest scratch. After work, I'd pick up the kids from activities, make dinner, help with homework, read Lily stories until she fell asleep and snuggled up against me. By midnight, I'd be in bed, too tired to even talk to Jack, who often fell asleep with his laptop on his lap, looking at his work reports. Jack was perfect, in a way. He was as reliable as the old oak tree in the yard, always there, always a shoulder to cry on. He woke up early to drive Sam to practice, fixed anything that broke around the house, and never forgot to wish me a happy anniversary or bring me flowers just because. Everyone at Willow Creek thought of us as the perfect couple, Jack and Kelly, the family that was always together, always smiling at school events, always holding hands at church picnics. But the truth was, Jack no longer saw me. Not Kelly the mother, not Kelly the wife who cooked dinner and ironed his shirts, but Kelly the woman, the one who used to laugh until she cried at his jokes, who danced in the rain with him, who dreamed of travel and adventure before life turned into an endless to-do list. I didn't notice when it started, this feeling of dissolving. Maybe it was after Lily was born, when I stopped sleeping through the night and my days began to revolve around diapers and bottles. Maybe it was when I turned 35 and looked in the mirror and saw not myself, but a woman who looked tired even when she was smiling. I loved my family, I loved my job, but somewhere deep inside I began to wonder, was there a person outside of all this? Was I still Kelly, or had I become just a shadow, performing roles wife, mother, nurse? The question was like a splinter I couldn't pull out, but I couldn't ignore either. I began to notice that I was missing something. Not love. I knew Jack loved me, even if his love had become as familiar as an old sweater. Not attention. He was always there, asking how my day was, helping with the kids. But I missed the feeling of being alive. That I wasn't just part of a machine that went through the day, but a woman who was seen, who was wanted, who could feel something more than exhaustion and responsibility. I tried to numb it. I joined a gym. I started putting on makeup before work. I bought a new blouse that seemed too bright for a school nurse. I told myself it was for me, for my confidence, but deep down I knew it was a lie. And then Trevor showed up. He was the coach of Lily's soccer team, tall, with an easy smile and a way of talking that made you feel special. He wasn't someone I was looking for. He was just there, at practices, at parent-teacher conferences, always with a joke or a kind word. I hadn't planned anything. But one day, when I stayed late after practice to discuss Lily's schedule, he suggested coffee at a nearby cafe. It was so innocent, just a conversation, just a cup of coffee. But there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen in Jack in a long time. Interest. Not in Lily's mother, not in Jack's wife, but in me, in Kelly. I thought one night, one moment to myself wouldn't destroy my world. I thought I could take that little piece of freedom, that breath of air, and go back to my life as if nothing had happened. I was wrong. It wasn't an excuse, it was a delusion. And now, looking back, I realized that that choice, which seemed so insignificant, was the beginning of the end of our family, the end of who I was, and the beginning of a long, painful journey to figuring out who I am now. Life in Willow Creek was like an old movie you watch on repeat. Familiar scenes, predictable dialogue, a comfortable but tiresome predictability. I was Kelly Harper, wife, mother, school nurse, a woman whose days were scheduled down to the minute, from the morning alarm to the last bedtime story for Lily. But somewhere inside me, beneath the layers of routine and responsibility, a spark of restlessness began to smolder, as if I had forgotten who I was, or worse, had never known. I didn't look for trouble, I didn't look for adventure, but when it found me, I didn't turn away. And looking back, I realized that this wasn't just weakness, it was a rebellion, quiet and desperate, against a life that was beginning to feel like a cage. Trevor Brown came into my life as quietly as a warm wind at the end of summer. He was the coach of Lily's soccer team, the man I saw every week on the field, shouting commands and cheering the kids on with an easy, infectious energy. He was tall, with dark hair, just a little gray, and a smile that seemed to promise that everything would be okay. I didn't think of him as someone who could change my life. He was just Trevor, the dad of one of the girls on the team, recently divorced, with a reputation for being a charming guy who always knew how to make a crowd laugh. But that day, at practice in early September, something changed. It was a typical Thursday, the air still warm, but with a hint of autumnal chill. I sat in the stands, watching Lily run after the ball, her pigtails bouncing and her face alight with excitement. Practice had ended and parents were gathering their children, but Lily, as usual, was lingering, chatting with her friends. I walked to the pitch to hurry her along, and Trevor was there, stuffing cones into a bag. "Kelly, you look like you're in an ad today," he said, smiling, his eyes lingering on me a little too long. It was a compliment, light, almost innocent, but there was something in his tone that made my heart skip a beat for a second. I laughed, waving it off. "Oh, come on, Trevor. I'm in jeans and a t-shirt, just came from the infirmary. This isn't an ad." "Well then, an ad for tired but damn cute nurses," he replied with a wink, and I felt my cheeks begin to burn. Not from embarrassment, but from something else, from this sudden, sharp feeling of being seen. Not as Lily's mother, not as Jack's wife, but as a woman. We chatted for a few more minutes about training, about Lily's progress on the team, about how hot it had been this summer. Nothing special, just small talk, but there was something in his gaze that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just friendliness, it was attention, real, genuine, like he was seeing me, not the role I was playing. As I led Lily to the car, I found myself smiling, and it wasn't the kind of smile I put on for my neighbors or co-workers. It was a smile that felt like my own. A week later, he was back at practice, and our conversation grew a little longer. He asked how I was managing my job and my kids, and without knowing why, I told him about how I sometimes felt invisible, like I was disappearing into endless to-do lists. He listened without interrupting, and his eyes were so attentive that I felt alive for the first time in a long time. He didn't offer solutions, didn't give advice like Jack would, he just listened. And when he said, "Kelly, you deserve more than just managing," I felt something inside me shift. Then there was coffee. It was a couple of weeks later, after another practice. Lily was late, as usual, and Trevor suggested we go to a nearby cafe just to chat. I knew I should have said no, that this was crossing some invisible line, but I said yes. We sat in a small cafe on the outskirts of Willow Creek, with faded checkered tablecloths and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. He talked about his life, his divorce, the struggle of starting over, how much he missed his daughter, who was now living with her mother. I listened, but what struck me most was the way he looked at me, as if I was the only person in the room, as if my words mattered. And I realized that I wanted this. Not him, not Trevor, but this feeling to be wanted, not just needed. I came home that night feeling a little guilty, but it was drowned out by something new, something I couldn't name. Jack was home, helping Sam with his homework, and I looked at him, trying to see the man I'd fallen in love with 12 years ago. He was still the same solid, kind, with those warm brown eyes that always calmed me. But he didn't see me the way Trevor did. He saw a wife, a mother, a partner in life, but not a woman who wanted to feel alive. And I hated myself for missing that, but I couldn't stop feeling it. The guilt grew with each passing day, but I pushed it down. I told myself it was no big deal, that I was just allowing myself a little attention, a little freedom. But then there was the night when everything changed. Practice ended late, and Trevor offered to give me a ride home because my car was in for repairs. Jack was at work, the kids were at a neighbor's, and I agreed. We stopped at his house to pick up some paperwork for the team, and he invited me in. I knew I shouldn't, but something inside me, the fatigue, the loneliness, the desire to feel alive again, nudged me over the threshold. It wasn't passion. It wasn't the wild, crazy attraction you read about in books or see in movies. It was rebellion against routine, against the feeling that I was disappearing, against a life that had become too predictable. We talked, we laughed, and then he kissed me, and I didn't pull away. It was like a breath of air after being underwater for so long. I felt alive, wanted, seen. And in that moment, I convinced myself that this wasn't cheating, that this was just my moment, my little piece of freedom that I deserved. But when I got home that night, the guilt washed over me like a wave. I looked at my sleeping children, at Jack, who had left me a note on the kitchen table. "Dinner is in the fridge, love you." And I knew I had done something I couldn't undo. I stood in the bathroom, looking at myself in the mirror, and wondered who this woman was looking back at me. I didn't know the answer, but I knew I couldn't stop. Not because I wanted Trevor, but because I wanted this feeling, the sense that I existed outside of my family, outside of my role. and that internal battle between guilt and desire was lost the moment I allowed myself to believe that one moment wouldn't destroy my world. I never thought that one choice could turn my entire life upside down, like a house of cards collapsing with the slightest breeze. I was Kelly Harper, a wife, a mother, a woman who thought she knew the line between right and wrong. But lines, it turns out, can be so blurry, so temptingly easy to cross, that you don't even notice when you're on the other side. I convinced myself that my encounters with Trevor weren't cheating, but just moments that were mine alone. Moments that made me feel alive again, that I was more than just a mother or a wife or a school nurse. But the truth, I learned, has a way of finding you, even when you hide behind the lies you tell yourself. By October, I couldn't ignore that my moments with Trevor had become more. They had started with coffee, with conversations, with the way he looked at me that made my heart beat faster. But now they were evenings when I'd tell Jack I'd be late at work and drive to Trevor's house on Oak Street. I hated myself for it, for lying, for hiding my phone, for locking it with a password so Jack wouldn't see my messages. But every time I was with Trevor, I felt like I was being born again. Not because I loved him, I knew that wasn't love. It was something else, something selfish and desperate. A desire to be wanted, to be seen, to be more than the routine that consumed me day after day. I tried to be careful. I got home early enough to avoid suspicion. I smiled at Jack. I listened to Sam talk baseball. I read stories to Lily. But deep down, I knew I was skating on thin ice. Jack was starting to notice, not directly, not overtly, but I could see it in the way he looked at me, in the way he asked me why I was late, or the way he looked at me when I checked my phone. I told myself he didn't know, that he was too busy with work and the kids to care. I told myself I had it all under control, that I could stop whenever I wanted. But the truth was, I didn't want to stop. Not because Trevor was anything special, but because he gave me something I couldn't find at home, a sense of being alive. That night started out like any other Thursday. I texted Jack to say I'd be late at work, another meeting that had become my cover. I drove to Trevor's, and we spent a couple of hours together, talking, laughing, letting reality slip away. When I walked out of his house, I felt light, almost weightless, as if a weight I'd been carrying for months had been lifted off my shoulders. I didn't know that Jack was there, in his car, 2 blocks away from Trevor's house, watching me. I didn't know that he'd seen me walk out, my hair all messed up, the smile I wasn't supposed to give him. I didn't know that he'd already figured it out. When I got home, Jack was in the living room, leafing through some work papers. He looked at me, and there was something in his eyes that made my heart clench. Not anger, not accusation, but something worse, pain mixed with exhaustion. I smiled, trying to act normal, and told him I was tired after a long day. He nodded, but his eyes were hard, like he was trying to decide whether to say what was on his mind. I went into the bathroom to take a shower and stood under the hot water, trying to wash away not only Trevor's scent, but the guilt that was starting to choke me. I told myself that I had it all under control, that Jack didn't know, that I could carry on as if nothing had changed. But somewhere deep inside, I could already feel the ice cracking beneath me. The next day, everything changed. I got home around 6, expecting the usual chaos: Sam with his homework, Lily with her drawings, Jack making dinner or checking the bills. But the house was strangely quiet. I walked into the kitchen and stopped dead in my tracks. The table was set for a special occasion: a white tablecloth, candles, glasses of wine, a bouquet of white roses, my favorite. Frank Sinatra was playing on the old record player, and I felt my heart clench. It felt like a scene from our old lives, from when we were just Jack and Kelly, in love, dreaming of the future. But something about the scene was wrong, like it was too perfect, too staged. "Jack, what is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, but inside I was shaking. I set my bag down and looked at him. He was standing at the stove, flipping steaks, and his face was calm, but there was a shadow in his eyes that made me wary. "Just wanted to do something special," he said, his voice even, almost too even. "Amy's having the kids, so it's a 2-person night. It's been a while since we've had anything like that." I nodded, trying to smile, but my heart was pounding like it knew something was wrong. "That's sweet," I said, taking off my jacket. "Give me 5 minutes, I'll get changed." I walked upstairs, my hands shaking. I'd changed into the blue silk blouse I'd bought a while ago, not because I wanted to look pretty, but because it felt like something that belonged to the new me, the one who felt alive with Trevor. But standing in front of the mirror, I suddenly felt out of place. I looked at my reflection and thought, "Who are you, Kelly? What are you doing?" But I brushed it aside, as I had so many times before, and went downstairs. Dinner was perfect steaks, baked potatoes, asparagus, the wine we'd loved since our first dates. We sat at the table, and for the first few minutes I tried to act normal. I told him about a funny story at school where one of the kids tried to hide a bug in his backpack, and Jack shared a story about a coworker who spilled coffee on his blueprints. We laughed, but the laughter was forced, as if we both knew we were playing roles in a play that was about to end. And then he asked. His voice was calm, almost casual, but the words hit me like lightning. "How was it on duty?" I looked down at my plate, trying not to meet his eyes. "Tired shift," I said, my voice even, as if I'd rehearsed the phrase 1,000 times. "A boy fell during recess and knocked out a tooth. I had to calm him down and call his parents." I thought he would nod like he always did, and we would continue talking about something else. But he didn't nod. He took a sip of wine, looked at me, and his eyes were so cold, so empty, that I felt my heart sink somewhere down. "I hope you helped him, like you helped Trevor last night," he said, and his words were like a knife stabbing straight into me. The fork fell from my hand, clanking onto the plate. I looked at him, and my face went numb. Shock, fear, panic, all mixed together in one moment, and I felt the blood drain from my face. He knew. He knew. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat, as if someone was squeezing my throat. His eyes, which had always been so warm, now looked at me with pain and anger, and I knew that this was the end. "Jack, please," I breathed, but my voice shook like an aspen leaf. I wanted to explain. I wanted to say that it wasn't what he thought, that it was just a mistake, a moment of weakness. But I knew he wouldn't believe it, because I didn't believe my own words. "Please, what?" His voice was so calm that it scared me even more. "So that I can pretend that nothing happened? So that I can remain the same convenient husband that can be deceived?" I shook my head, tears burning my eyes, but I couldn't stop them. "It was only once." I began, but he interrupted me. "You've been to his house at least 4 times in the last 2 weeks," he said, each word a blow. I wouldn't have noticed once. 4 is a pattern. I felt the ground slipping from under my feet. He knew. He was watching me. I wanted to ask how, why, but the words wouldn't come. My inner voice, the one that had been whispering to me all this time, "He'll understand, he'll forgive, we're family," was now screaming in horror. I looked at Jack, the man I loved, the man I'd shared 12 years of my life with, and I knew I'd ruined everything. Not Trevor, not the circumstances, but myself. "Jack, I didn't mean to," I began, but he stood up, and his movements were so abrupt that I flinched. He walked over to the closet, pulled out a white envelope, and placed it in front of me. I knew what it was before he spoke. "The house will be yours," he said, and his voice was as cold as the winter wind. "The car, too, but the children will live with me, and I will do everything to make sure the court confirms that. Not because you are a bad mother, but because you destroyed the family deliberately, coldly, methodically." I started to cry, covering my face with my hands, but he didn't stop. He turned and walked away, leaving me alone at the table, surrounded by candles that still burned and Sinatra's music that now sounded like a mockery. I sat there, feeling my world crumble, and I knew it was my fault. I wanted to scream, to beg him to stay, to explain that I didn't want to lose him, that I loved him, Sam, Lily. But I knew he wouldn't hear, because I had broken the trust that was the foundation of our family. I sat in the empty kitchen, staring at the envelope with the divorce papers, and I felt the panic give way to emptiness. I thought that one night, one moment to myself, wouldn't ruin my world. I thought I could take this little piece of freedom and go back to my life like nothing had happened. But I was wrong, and now I was going to pay for it not just by losing Jack, but by losing myself, the Kelly who once believed that family was everything. I sat there in silence and knew that this was just the beginning, that there would be trials and rumors and pain ahead. And I didn't know how I was going to live with it, but I knew I had to find a way, because despite everything, I was still a mother, and Sam and Lily were the only thing keeping me from drowning in my own guilt. I never thought that one night could be the point of no return, the moment when everything you thought was yours, your home, your family, your self-respect crumbled through your fingers. After that dinner, when Jack put the divorce papers in front of me, the world I knew ceased to exist. I sat in the empty kitchen, surrounded by candles burning low, leaving behind the smell of melted wax and Sinatra's music that now sounded like a requiem for our lives. I stared at the white envelope on the table and felt something break inside me, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like cracked glass about to shatter into pieces. I wanted to scream, to run after Jack, to beg him to stay, but I knew he wouldn't hear, because I had destroyed what was between us with my own hands. The next morning, I woke up feeling like the world had gone gray. The house on 3rd Street and Elm Avenue that had once been full of Sam and Lily's laughter, their stomping on the stairs, the smell of morning coffee, now felt empty, as if all life had been sucked out of it. I wandered through the rooms, touching familiar things: Lily's drawings taped to the refrigerator, Sam's baseball glove forgotten on the couch, Jack's old mug that says, "Best Dad." Each one felt like a knife stabbing my heart, a reminder of what I had lost. I tried calling Jack, texting him, but he wouldn't answer. His silence was worse than a scream, worse than an accusation. It was cold, final, like a door slamming in my face. A few days later, I learned that he had filed for divorce. I received formal notice from a lawyer, Marilyn Crow, a woman whose name I had heard around Willow Creek synonymous with ruthlessness. The papers were clear and cold. Jack wanted full custody of Sam and Lily, with weekend visitation rights for me. The house and car were mine, but that was no consolation, more a reminder that I was alone in this big, empty house that had once been ours. I sat at the kitchen table, going over the papers, trying to figure out how I had gotten to this point. I wanted freedom, I wanted to feel alive, but instead of wings, I got emptiness, cold, hollow, like the echoes of an abandoned building. I hired a lawyer, David Lewis, a young guy from Springfield who promised he would do everything in his power to keep my children. But even he, with his upbeat tone and confident smile, couldn't hide the shaky nature of my case. Jack had produced evidence GPS tracking that showed me driving to Trevor's, printouts of text messages I hadn't deleted, and testimony from Trevor's neighbor, Mrs. Edwards, who had apparently spotted my car in his driveway. I felt naked, exposed, as if my every move had been documented and was now being used against me. And the worst part was the realization that I had given Jack this evidence and had destroyed the trust that had been the foundation of our family. The trial was scheduled for a month later, but Willow Creek had already given its verdict on me. Small towns like ours thrive on gossip, and my story with Trevor had spread faster than I could have imagined. I noticed it at the diner on Main Street, where the waitresses who had once chatted with me about the weather now looked away. Mrs. Callahan, our neighbor who always brought me casseroles, stopped saying hello when I passed her house. Even at the school where I worked as a nurse, the parents were beginning to regard me with suspicion. Some asked to have someone else see their children, and I saw teachers whispering behind my back in the staff room. I tried to put on a brave face, to smile, to pretend everything was normal, but every sidelong glance, every whisper, was like a slap in the face. I lost not only my family, but also my place in this city, my good name, which I had built over the years. Trevor paid a price too. After word of our affair reached the school where he coached the youth soccer team, he was asked to leave. His parents were furious, not just that he was sleeping with a married woman, but because he was their kid's coach, someone they trusted. I heard that his wife, Sarah, had filed for divorce after learning of our affair, and that was another blow. I tried to contact him, to apologize, to tell him I hadn't meant to ruin his life, but he was gone. His phone was disconnected, and his house on Oak Street sat empty, with a for sale sign on the lawn. I didn't blame him for running away. I would have run away too, if I could. But the worst thing was the feeling I got when I looked in the mirror. I had lost all self-respect. I would look at my reflection and not recognize the woman staring back at me. Where was Kelly, who laughed with Jack over burnt pancakes, who sang lullabies to Lily, who dreamed of travel and a new life? I thought that being with Trevor would give me wings, give me the freedom I so desperately sought. But instead, it gave me emptiness, cold, bottomless, like the abyss I had pushed myself into. I hated myself for what I had done, for choosing a selfish moment over my family, for allowing myself to believe that there would be no consequences. I tried to contact Jack and begged him to give me a chance to explain. System, explain. He was cold as ice, and I knew he wouldn't back down. I kept calling, texting, pleading, but his silence was louder than words. He filed for divorce, and it wasn't just a legal move, it was his final statement. You're not part of our family anymore. The trial was a public humiliation. The GPS tracking data he'd somehow obtained showed my trips to Trevor's irrefutable evidence I couldn't deny. Trevor's neighbor, Mrs. Edwards, testified that she'd seen my car outside his house. Every word in the courtroom was a blow, shattering the last of my self-respect. I sat there in the formal gray suit I'd chosen to look respectable, but I felt naked, exposed to the world. My lawyer, David Lewis, tried to soften the blow. He talked about stress, about how I had been temporarily lost, that I was still a loving mother. But the judge, Elizabeth Hartman, looked at me with a cold distance, her eyes saying, "You made a choice, and now you're reaping the consequences." 2 months after the trial began, the decision was made. Jack was awarded primary custody of Sam and Lily. I was given weekend visitation and shared vacations, but that was small consolation. I had lost the right to be their mother every day, to see them at breakfast, to put them to bed, to be a part of their daily lives. The house on 3rd Street was mine, as was the car, but they were empty trophies, reminders of what I had destroyed. Willow Creek turned its back on me. People who once smiled at me at school events now looked away. Mrs. Callahan, our neighbor, stopped bringing her casseroles, and her eyes were full of judgment when I passed. At school, parents began demanding that someone else examine their children, and I felt their whispers in the teacher's lounge cutting me like knives. I kept working because it was all I had left, but every day was a struggle to hold my head up high when everyone around me knew my story. Trevor disappeared from town. After the school fired him, he couldn't handle the pressure. The parents of the kids on the team were furious, and his reputation was in tatters. I heard that Sarah, his wife, had filed for divorce, and soon after, his house on Oak Street was put up for sale. I tried to contact him to apologize, but his phone was disconnected, and he just disappeared, as if he'd never existed. I didn't blame him. I wished I could disappear, to hide from the shame that followed me everywhere. But worst of all, I lost all respect for myself. I'd look in the mirror and not recognize the woman staring back at me. Where was Kelly, dancing in the rain with Jack, singing lullabies to Lily, dreaming of more than this life? I thought Trevor would give me freedom, wings to fly above the routine that was suffocating me. But instead, I got emptiness, cold, echoing, like an abandoned house where the echoes of my own mistakes bounced off the walls. I hated myself for choosing a selfish moment over my family, for allowing myself to believe that there would be no consequences. I kept calling Jack, texting him, begging him to see me, to talk, to explain. I went to therapy, trying to figure out what had set me on this path. I promised myself that I would cut Trevor out of my life, that I would do anything to earn my children's trust, to be a mother to them, even if I couldn't be Jack's wife. But his coldness was impenetrable. He didn't yell, he didn't accuse, he simply withdrew, as if I had ceased to exist for him. And that was the worst of it, his silence, his firmness, his final decision that I was no longer a part of his world. Every night, I came home to an empty house, where the silence was louder than any words. I sat in the kitchen, looking at Lily's drawings that still hung on the fridge, and I felt tears stinging my eyes. I thought about Sam, his silent pain, and Lily asking why I wasn't with them anymore. I wanted to be with them. I wanted to be the mother they deserved, but I knew I had to earn that right all over again. I knew I had to find a way to live with this emptiness, this guilt, this feeling that I had lost everything I cared about. I thought freedom would give me wings. I thought one moment for myself wouldn't destroy my world. But I was wrong. Freedom gave me emptiness, and now I had to learn to live in it, step by step, day by day, in the hope that one day I would be able to look in the mirror and see not only my mistakes, but also a woman who could still start over. The emptiness I felt after that dinner, when Jack placed the divorce papers in front of me, wasn't just pain, it was a black hole, consuming everything I'd once considered myself. I'd lost my husband, my home, my reputation in Willow Creek, but worst of all, I knew I was in danger of losing Sam and Lily, my children, my only reason to breathe. I was no longer Jack's wife, but I was still a mother, and that role became my anchor, my battle, my redemption. I knew I couldn't go back to the past, but I had to fight to be a part of their future, even if it meant going through shame, pain, and endless attempts to prove myself worthy of their love. The trial was humiliating. The Springfield courtroom, with its cold wooden benches and Judge Elizabeth Hartman's stern gaze, was a place where my mistakes were laid out like evidence in a criminal case. The GPS tracking data Jack had somehow obtained showed my visits to Trevor 4 times in 2 weeks, each a nail in the coffin of our family. My lawyer, David Lewis, tried to soften the blow by talking about stress, about how I had been a good mother despite my mistakes, but I could see the judge taking notes, her gaze growing colder. When she made her decision, I felt the ground shift from beneath me. Jack was awarded primary custody of Sam and Lily, and I was given weekends and vacations together. I lost the right to be with them every day, to see them at breakfast, to help them with their homework, to put them to bed. It wasn't just a defeat, it was the loss of a part of myself. But I didn't give up. I couldn't. Sam and Lily were my light, my reason, and I knew I had to fight for them, even if it meant battling my own guilt and shame. I signed up for therapy, meeting weekly with Dr. Emily Ross, a soft-spoken woman with piercing eyes who helped me sort through the chaos of my thoughts. I tried to understand why I'd done what I'd done, why I'd allowed myself to believe that hooking up with Trevor had been an innocent moment for me instead of a betrayal. I talked to her about Jack, about how much I missed him, about how I hated myself for breaking his trust. But mostly, I talked about the kids, about how I feared they would look at me the way Jack did, with hurt and disappointment. My attempts to fix things started small. I knew I couldn't bring Jack back. His coldness was like a wall I couldn't break through. But I could be a mother, even if it meant only being one on weekends. I'd pick up Sam and Lily every Saturday morning, standing on the threshold of their new home in Fairview, feeling like a stranger. Jack was polite, but his eyes were empty, like he was looking right through me. I tried not to show how much it hurt, smiling, hugging the kids, promising them a fun day. But every time I picked them up, I felt the shame burning inside me. I knew they'd heard the gossip, knew their mother had done something bad, and it was like a knife in the heart. The first conversation with the kids was the hardest. I took them to the park in Fairview, the one where they liked to feed the ducks. We sat on a bench by the pond, and I looked at their faces, Sam, with his serious eyes, and Lily, who was fiddling with the hem of her jacket. I knew I had to be honest, but how do you explain to a 7-year-old girl and a 10-year-old boy that their mother had made a mistake that had destroyed their family? Guys, I began, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to keep it together. I want to talk to you about what happened. I did something that hurt Dad, and you, and I'm so sorry it happened. Lily looked at me, her eyes full of questions. Mom, why don't you live with us? Don't you love us anymore? I felt tears sting my eyes, but I swallowed the lump in my throat. Oh, Lily, no, I love you more than anything in the world. This isn't about you. This is about me making a mistake. Grown-ups do the wrong thing sometimes, and I chose something that was wrong, and now I'm trying to fix it. Sam was silent, looking at the water where the ducks swam lazily in circles. His silence was worse than any words. Sam, I said quietly, you can talk to me. I know you're angry, and you have a right to be. He turned to me, and his eyes were so grown up, so full of pain, I could hardly breathe. "Why did you do this, Mom? Dad said you were with someone else. Is that true?" I nodded, feeling the shame burn through me. "Yes, Sam, it's true. I did something I shouldn't have, and I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I never wanted you to feel this way." "But you did," he said, his voice quiet but firm like Jack's. "You did, and now everything is different." I couldn't answer. I just hugged him, and to my surprise, he didn't pull away. Lily snuggled into my other side, and we sat there, the three of us, in silence, until the sun began to set. I knew this conversation was just the beginning, that I had a long way to go to earn their trust back. But I was ready. I had to be. Every weekend, I tried to do something special for them. I took Lily to the art store, bought her new paints and sketchbooks, and sat with her for hours while she painted. I took Sam to baseball games in Springfield, even if he was quiet, even if I felt like he was keeping me at a distance. I knew I couldn't fix everything in a day, but I could be there, I could show them I loved them, even if they doubted me. Willow Creek continued to judge me. The rumors continued. I could hear the whispers in the diner, feel the eyes of parents at school. My job became a challenge. I was still a nurse, but some parents refused to let me examine their children, and I saw the way my coworkers looked away when I walked into the staff room. I tried to hold my head up high, but every day was like fighting the wind in my face. I had lost the respect of the town, but worst of all, I had lost the respect of myself. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who had destroyed her family for a moment of selfishness, and that was harder than any gossip. I continued going to therapy, and Dr. Ross helped me sort through my feelings. She asked me why I sought Trevor's attention, why I had allowed myself to cross the line. I couldn't answer right away. It was like unraveling a knot I had tied myself. I talked about how I felt invisible, how I wanted to be seen not just as a mother or a wife, but as a woman. I talked about how I feared I had lost myself in the routine, in the endless days that blurred into one. But I also knew that was no excuse. It was my choice, and I had to live with the consequences. I wrote to Jack, begged him to talk, but he remained stone cold. He was polite when I picked up the kids, but his eyes were blank, as if I had ceased to exist for him. I didn't blame him. I knew I had hurt him more deeply than I could have imagined. But I kept trying, not for him, but for Sam and Lily. I wanted them to see that I was fighting, that I wouldn't give in, even if the world turned against me. One day, when I brought the kids back to Fairview after a weekend away, Lily gave me a drawing of our family, but this time I was next to her and Sam, not off to the side like in her previous drawings. I looked at her, and she smiled, shyly but sincerely. "It's you, Mom," she said. "You're always with us, aren't you?" I hugged her, feeling tears streaming down my cheeks. "Always, baby," I whispered. "Always." Sam stood to the side, but I saw the way he looked at me, and there was less anger in his eyes than before. It wasn't a victory, but it was a step. A small, fragile step toward regaining their trust. I knew it would be a long road, that I had to prove to them and to myself that I could be the mother they deserved. I was ready for that fight, even if it meant living with the pain and shame I'd brought on myself. The time after the divorce was like a walk in the desert, endless, exhausting, with every step a reminder of what you'd lost, but where you had to keep going. I, Kelly Harper, was no longer the woman who'd once danced in the rain with Jack or sung lullabies to Lily as she fell asleep with a stuffed bunny in her arms. I was a shadow of Kelly, a woman trying to piece herself back together from the pieces she'd shattered. The house on 3rd Street and Elm Avenue that had once been full of laughter and warmth was now just a building where I lived alone, surrounded by the memories of the family I'd lost. But even in that emptiness, I clung to one thing, the hope that I could still be a mother to Sam and Lily, even if I was no longer Jack's wife. The trial left scars that never healed. Jack had primary custody of the kids, and I saw them only on weekends. In the few precious hours I could take them to Fairview and try to rebuild the bond I'd broken. I tried to be the best mother I could be to them, taking Lily to the art store, buying Sam tickets to baseball games, sitting with them in the park and listening to them talk about school and their friends. But every time I handed them back to Jack, I felt my heart clench with pain. Their new house in Fairview, a small cottage with peeling green paint, had become their real home, and I was just a guest, coming and going. I kept going to therapy, meeting weekly with Dr. Emily Ross, who helped me sort through my mistakes. I talked to her about Trevor, how I wasn't looking for love, but for confirmation that I still existed as a woman, not just a mother or a wife. I talked about Jack, how his coldness hurt me, but I knew it was my own fault. I talked about the kids, how I was afraid they'd never forgive me, that they'd only see me as the one who'd broken up their family. Dr. Ross listened, asking questions that made me dig deeper than I wanted to. "What made you think one night would be okay?" she'd ask, and I couldn't answer. Because the truth was, I wasn't thinking. I just wanted to feel alive, and that desire had blinded me. I tried to contact Jack, not to get him back, I knew that was impossible, but to at least explain, to let him know that I wasn't a monster, just a person who had made a mistake. I called him, I texted him, but he rarely answered. His silence wasn't out of anger, as I first thought, but out of grief, the deep, quiet kind I saw in his eyes when he opened the door to hand me the kids. I hated myself for it, for breaking the man who loved me, who was my home, my anchor, my best friend. One day, almost a year after the divorce, I plucked up the courage to call him. It was late at night, the kids were asleep, and I was sitting in the empty kitchen, staring at the drawing Lily had given me the weekend before of our family, with me standing next to her and Sam, but Jack was a little further away. I dialed his number, my fingers shaking, almost hoping he wouldn't answer. But he did on the third ring, and his voice was as cold and tired as ever. "Kelly," he said, and there was so much in that one word, the pain, the weariness, the distance I'd created. "Jack," I began, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to sound calm. "I know you don't want to talk to me, and I don't blame you, but I have to say, I still love you, even though I lost everything. I lost you, our home, our family, and I know it's my fault. I want you to know that I'm sorry, not because I lost you, but because I hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that." I paused, waiting for him to answer, but he didn't. I could hear his breathing, even and heavy, and the silence was louder than any words. It wasn't out of anger, as I had first thought, but out of grief deep, irreversible, and something I had sown. I wanted to say more, to beg him to forgive me, but I knew it was useless. He wasn't ready, and he might never be. "Kelly," he finally said, his voice so quiet I could barely hear him. "I don't know what to say. I don't hate you, but I can't. I can't talk about this. Not now." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and felt tears streaming down my cheeks. "I understand," I whispered. "Just take care of the kids and yourself." He didn't answer, and a second later I heard him hang up. I sat in the dark, clutching the phone, feeling the emptiness I'd created wash over me. I wasn't a monster, but I'd broken the man who loved me, and it was worse than any pain I could imagine. My new life was lonely, but I was learning to live in it. I kept working as a school nurse at Willow Creek, despite the whispers and the sideways glances. I knew the town wouldn't forgive me, but I tried not to let that define me. I focused on the kids, on the weekends I could be with them, on their smiles, their stories, their small victories. Lily's paintings were brighter, more colorful, and I saw hope in them. Sam was still quiet, but sometimes he'd tell me stories about baseball, about school, and I clung to those moments like a lifeline. Therapy helped me understand my mistakes. I realized that I wasn't looking for Trevor, but for myself, the Kelly who was lost in the routine, in the endless days of being just a mother and a wife. I wanted to feel wanted, seen, alive, and I chose the most destructive path to get there. I learned to accept my guilt, not as a punishment, but as a lesson. I wasn't a monster, but I was a person who made a choice, and those choices had consequences. I learned to live with it, to be better, not for Jack, not for the town, but for Sam and Lily, for myself. The final game of the football season was symbolic for me. I had driven to Fairview to watch Lily play. I sat in the stands, surrounded by other parents who now barely even said hello to me. The field was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, and I watched Lily run, her pigtails bouncing, her face alight with excitement. Sam was sitting nearby, shouting advice, and Jack was standing on the sidelines, like a coach, a whistle around his neck, barking instructions. He looked happy. Not the happiness we once had, but a new, solid happiness, like he'd found his place, despite everything I'd done. I looked at them, at Jack, laughing when Lily missed the goal, at Sam, cheering on his sister, at Lily, running without looking back. They were family, even without me, and it was like a knife in my heart. But at the same time, I felt something else: warmth, pride, love. I smiled despite the tears that streamed down my cheeks. I had lost them as a wife, but I was still their mother, and I knew I would fight for them for the rest of my life. I sat there in the stands and thought about how far I'd come, how much I'd lost. I thought about Jack, about his silence, about the grief I'd caused him. I thought about myself, a woman who wanted to be free and found only emptiness. But I also thought about hope, that maybe one day I'd be able to look in the mirror and see not just my mistakes, but the woman who'd learned to fix them. I smiled through my tears, looking at my family, who were different now, but still mine. And I knew that despite everything, I would find a way to be a part of their lives, not as a wife, but as a mother, as someone learning to be better, one day at a time. We were very pleased to tell you this story. We hope it resonated with you. Until next time, friends, and remember, every word you say in the comments is a gift to us. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.